My name's Megan. I'm 31 years old, and I'm not really from anywhere, if that makes sense, because I've moved all over the place. I was born in Oklahoma City, and my parents were both addicted to drugs and alcohol together. They had met in San Francisco. He had family in Oklahoma and Illinois. They're Native American from Illinois. And he brought my mom out there. They were still continuing to use drugs and alcohol, and they got married. They had me, and my mom didn't like it out there. So she moved me out to California. Shortly after she moved me to California, she then met another guy and moved us up to Washington State. And my father then got arrested for some major crimes out in Oklahoma. And my mom continued to have more children with more men using drugs and alcohol along the way. And my father ended up getting sentenced to 30 years in prison. And I think that's when the family started to deteriorate, because my mother knew that my father was never going to come help take care of me. So she was on her own with me. And then she had her other children. During that time, there was a lot of abuse. There was a lot of neglect. My mom was actually a firefighter and an EMT, but she was still an addict. She would leave us home like for days at a time. She would leave us, neglected to where like my sister's hair was matted. We were having to try to forage food for ourselves. The food in the fridge often had gone bad. We had rashes, so we would have clothes that were dirty. And sometimes she would lock us in the bedroom, and she would put the lock on the outside. We had to use the restroom. We had to go in the bedroom. During that time, I was also sexually abused by my babysitter. I remember the police coming because I told another babysitter, because there was like a cycle of babysitters that she would use. And I remember being at one babysitter's house and him coming over, and I went and hid. They asked me what was wrong, and I told them the things that he had done. And I remember police being there. I remember showing on like a stuffed animal what he had done. And then nothing ever happened. This is like 7-year-old me trying to figure out what's going on. I know I never saw him again after that. I found out later that my mom had said that I had an overactive imagination. I was making it up. And she had no idea, which babysitter I was talking about. Even later on in life, I had talked to my mom and I said, this happened to me as a child. And she said she had no idea, but it's all in the CPS record. She was basically, I think, turning a blind eye to these things because it was her best friend's child. It was her drug connection. So she just turned a blind eye to it and didn't listen to me when I told her what was happening. And I continued to be put in these situations that were not good with people who should not be in charge of children. Finally, all 3 of us got removed from home. At this time, she had 3 and she was pregnant with a 4th. One of my sisters was almost a year old and had no developing muscles in her body. She was just kept in a car seat the entire time. And so there was we're all missing stuff. I had a hard time with speech and writing. I was in the 2nd grade, but I couldn't write or read very well at all. Another one of my sisters had no vocabulary, and the other one had no muscle development. So we got moved into foster care. And then I got adopted. We all got split up into different homes, and each got adopted by a different family. And I came out to California, and that's when my adoptive parents, got me up to speed. My mother had her degree in child development. My adoptive father is a scientist. And by 4th grade, I was reading at an 8th grade level. The ability was there. It just wasn't being fostered. But I loved to read and write. I was very academically doing well in school. I had no interest in dating. But I still had self-esteem issues. I'm being raised by a white family, but I'm going to see my grandmother on the weekends who's trying to teach me my heritage and my culture. And I love my adoptive parents to death, but they were so strict. I think they really tried to do everything they could so that I wouldn't be like my mother. I felt like they were really harsh and overly restrictive. I didn't have a cell phone. I didn't get to watch TV. I didn't have computer privileges. So there wasn't just a whole lot of social interaction for me other than going to school, going home. And then I was a bookworm because that was the only thing that I was allowed to do. And then I started, and then I was allowed to have a job when I was 16. Because of this restrictiveness, the minute I turned 18, I was out the door. Like my 18th birthday, I said, I'm leaving. And I left and I moved out. I was not prepared for the outside world. I had my minimum wage job that was part-time, and this was in 2008. So I was making $7.50 an hour. Rent was actually affordable back then. My studio was $450. So I was getting by. And then I started working in a nightclub because I'm like, oh, these girls are making like a couple $100s a day. And that's a lot of money in 2008, 2009. During a recession, I couldn't even get a job at American Eagle. It was really hard. And so I started doing this. And that's when this guy walked in and he had his flashy muscle car. He had all this money. He was giving me $300-400 a day just to sit down and talk to him. And my rent was paid in 2 nights. My rent was paid. And this was a couple days before Christmas. So Christmas and was taken care of. I was just like, oh, wow, what a nice guy. I had just turned 19 years old. And he says to me, well, I gotta go and do some trips down to Los Banos, which is like in the middle of nowhere. He says, you want to go with me? Just ride with me. You know, I'll give you some money. And so I did. I got in the car and I rode down with him. And he said that he was selling marijuana to a dispensary, and it was, you know, legally grown, and that he was selling it to a dispensary. And I completely believed that because I didn't have, you know, I had a cell phone and everything by then, but you couldn't just pull up the news on your phone. I mean, you didn't really have like social media apps on your phone yet. And I didn't have cable because I was broke, you know, going to the club or going to school, college. And so I seen a couple things about how it was being legalized, and a lot of the girls that I worked with were smoking. And so I just was like, oh yeah, no, that sounds legit. So he was making this money and then he'd give me $200, $300, and seemed great. And he was, you know, I started opening up to him about my past and my childhood, and he just seemed to be so sympathetic, so bad what you went through, and your parents just didn't understand you, and they don't deserve you. That's what he told me. Your parents don't deserve you, and why don't you, you know, come up with me? You come up and live with me. You won't have to pay rent, so you can save money for school. We can get you a better car than what you're driving. You can have a muscle car like me. And so after, it took about 9 months of him trying to convince me to go up there and live with him and stay with him. We were intimate, but he never said things like I love you or honey, or we weren't in a relationship, but I thought maybe eventually we would be. Once I moved up there, it was not like that at all. I had no car. He had convinced me to sell my car because we'll get you a better one. No big deal. I had no money. I quit my job. He moved me up into the middle of nowhere in a very rural area, no cell phone service. So I was in this like rundown trailer, and he was like, okay, this is what you're going to start doing. You're going to start watering the plants. You're going to start trimming. You're going to start cleaning the house. You're going to start picking up, you know, he had this big hoard that he had to clean out from one of his family members had hoarded the place out, and, you know, washing the car, doing the dish. I was a house servant. That's what I was. I was like free labor. I realized very quickly that this is not what I thought it was going to be. There was no relationship. It was just, I was tricked. His grandmother took my social security card and claimed me on her taxes as a dependent. So she got extra money for me being a dependent. They had me go up and sign up for food stamps so that they could get food. They would go and burglarize houses and steal appliances, and then I'd have to like clean the appliances so they could go sell them. His grandmother worked for IHSS. She didn't want to take care of a client. She would send me to go take care of the client, but of course she's getting the money. So that's like IHSS fraud right there. At the end of the year, he would give me $900. And that was so that I could buy Christmas presents for my family. When I asked to go see my family, again, your parents didn't deserve you. They don't even like you. You know, you're the adopted kid, and obviously the way they treated you means they didn't like you. Do you think they really want to see you? Like, he had turned me against my own family to where I just was like, oh yeah, you know what? Screw them. And so I didn't really want to go see them. And then when I did, he'd be like, okay, we can go for an hour. And then he would come in the house. He like shook my dad's hand and sat there. And so there, I couldn't say anything. You know, I couldn't talk about what was going on. And I knew that something wasn't right. but I just, like, I can't tell my parents this is going on because they'll be unhappy, right? And to me, this is kind of my standard now in relationships is, if you can't tell your parents about something, it probably shouldn't be happening. But that's not how it was back then. I was like, they just won't understand. They're just not hip to the marijuana game. So it continued on like that. But it got worse in the way that when harvest season would come around, his friends would come into town, his buyers would come into town, and they would hold these parties, and he would have me start drinking. He would have me start dancing for his friends. He would offer me up to his friends. Luckily, I think that even they thought that was not right. Luckily, like, I never had to like have sex with any of them, but I still had to like dance and do things I wasn't really comfortable doing. So it was like a party favor. And so that would happen in the winter time. And then there was this guy that was like a member of a cartel. He had a grow house in town, in the main town. And he said, I'll give you money to put her in my house for 6 months to, you know, clean my house, make sure my grow is going well, and basically just maintain the place. And so that's what he did. He put me up in that house for 6 months, and he got paid for it. Luckily, the guy was hardly ever there, so he never tried to do anything. But it was basically, I was a domestic servant for him for 6 months while he was out of town. Then I got brought back out into the middle of nowhere, and it just kept going on like that. And then it started getting to the point where, you know, I wasn't staying up late enough. I wasn't being productive enough. So he was giving me drugs and saying, you know, do this drug to stay up later, or do this drug to get in the mood, because he wanted to be intimate and I didn't want to be. And so he's like, well, do this. And then once I was to the point of oblivion, he just did whatever he wanted to do. He was getting extremely abusive. He was starting to kick me, hit me, pull my hair, throw things at me, destroy my belongings. I had 2 cats. I still have them. They were born feral out on the property, and he let me keep them because they were good with pest control. And so I did take them and get them fixed and everything. When he was mad, he would hurt the cats too. We'd like take one by the scruff and toss it. And then there was a couple times we would be in the middle of nowhere and he would just leave me on the side of the road someplace. Highway 20 takes you from like Colusa to Fort Bragg. And there's a lot of parts along that highway where there's no service. There's a lot of wildlife. And sometimes he would just pull me out of the car and just leave me there. And it was like a power move. Like, I am in control and I can leave you to get hurt or whatever. You are dependent on me. So he did that a couple times. One time I did try to leave. His uncle's girlfriend came and helped me pack up all my stuff and leave. And I had left for 2 days and realized that I didn't really know what to do, you know, or how to get around. And then he's like, you have 48 hours to get back here or you're going to pay for it. He's like, I'll go take a trip to your family's house. And to me, that meant like he would hurt my family. And I had 2 brothers. They were both pretty young at the time. They were like 5 and 7. I didn't want my family to be brought into this. They didn't do anything wrong. I went back. I got to a point where I just kind of accepted that this is the way it was going to be. And I was going to do it to keep my family safe. There was a couple times we got pulled over by law enforcement. There was one time after that incident when we got pulled over and he had a ton of drugs under the hood of his car. And I remember hearing the dog barking in the car, in the cop car. And I was like, dude, the dog's going to find the drugs. He's going to go to jail. Like, I'm out of here. And they pulled us out of the car. I was shaking. And they even said, like, why are you nervous? And to me, doing the work that I do now, if I notice that somebody's nervous, I'd be like, come talk to me. But they didn't do that. They're just like, why are you nervous? And I'm like, I don't know. And he's watching me the entire time. They put us both off to the side of the road and they ran the dog through the car. The dog did not find the drugs. And I'm sitting there and I was like, how? Like, how does the dog not find the drugs? Like, what is going on here? And I just felt like I was in the Twilight Zone. And they're like, okay, you're good to go. It was insane to me. Like, it just felt so like unreal. And so there was that incident. There was an incident where, you know, because he was growing at the 99 plant limit, the county then passed a measure that you can have 8 plants on an acre of property. So he didn't follow that rule. And then the rest of them he had hidden in a horse trailer out on the side of the road. And what I will say is I have nothing against people growing marijuana. But anyway, the task force for the county started coming through the neighborhood, and we were getting word of it. And, people were starting to call each other. They're coming, they're taking everything. And so I'm thinking, again, here's another opportunity. If they come in this house, they're going to see he's got like tons of stolen firearms. He's got all this stuff he's not supposed to have. He's a felon. And I'm like, maybe they'll talk to me. So I thought, like, for sure, this time, this is it. And they come to the property, they open up the gate, they walk through, and they told him to take down his plants. And I remember standing there on the porch, and he said, get inside. And I looked at them, and they looked at me, and I just walked inside. And that was it. And I watched him through the window take down all his plants. They gave him an abatement notice, and they left. That was it. And I was like, okay, well, there's another opportunity that went by. And to add insult to injury, he actually sued them and won because they came onto the property without a warrant. They didn't have a warrant, and you're supposed to give you 10 days to get rid of your stuff. They actually violated his civil rights. And that was just like the sick part of it. I was like, now you're giving my trafficker money because you messed this whole thing up. It was getting really bad. The sexual assault was getting worse and worse. The abuse was getting worse and worse. The cops kept taking all his plants, couldn't grow his 99 plants anymore. So he did make me go out and get jobs. And as soon as he felt like I was starting to make friends at work, he would just have me quit. So I have all these jobs where I've just quit without notice. And again, I had to give all that money to him to keep his little grow left that he had, because he'd never had a job this entire time. It went from before, how I mentioned he was having me use drugs to stay up or get in the mood. Well, those were all uppers, but now he was starting to use downers. I didn't like it. They made me hallucinate. I need to get a plan. I need to get out of here. I had gotten rear-ended as a passenger in a vehicle, and I got a little bit of money from it. And so I said, I really want to get a car. And he said, yeah, sure. He said, it needs a lot of work, but we'll put the work into it. So as soon as this car is done, I'm out of here. This car is taking forever. And I started working at this place, and I did start building some friendships there. I didn't want to get too close to them because as soon as I did, I knew he would be like, you need to quit. I remember he gave me some pills, and he said, take these pills. And I said, what are they? And he's like, you're not going to ask me questions. You're just going to take them. They were morphine. They were 100 milligram morphine. I wasn't an opiate user. Like I said, he started giving me downers, but it was like Vicodin, stuff like that. It was like nothing too crazy, but I was not prepared for that, and I started to overdose. And I remember asking to go to the hospital, and I was hallucinating really bad. I said, this is too much. I need to go to the hospital. And he was like, nope, you just can't handle the high, And I was like, no, I need to go to the hospital. And I started drifting in and out of consciousness. And I remember going to sleep and thinking this is it. I'm going to sleep. I thought that I was dying. There'd been times before when he would hold guns to my head or threaten me and stuff like that. And he had said before, I can't kill you because your parents will wonder where you are. Now, in the labor trafficking, in the marijuana industry, there was a lot of immigrants, and they would get killed at the end of the season. They would just get rid of them. Nobody reports them missing because they don't have family here, right? That wasn't the case with me. I did have a normal family that eventually, if they didn't hear from me, would start to ask questions. And I think they were starting to get a little bit suspicious of what was going on too. So he had said that before. He goes, people actually care about you. So, I can't just get rid of you like that. He's like, but I would have already because you're pretty much useless. I remember thinking to myself after that happened, this is how he's going to kill me. And he's going to tell my family I overdosed. That's how I'm going to be remembered by my family as an addict. I can't be doing that. He's going to kill me. I started really starting to plan my way out of there. That's when I started making friends at work. And one girl, she wrote me a note because we were working in a phone operation center. So she wrote me a note you deserve so much better. We can get you a little car. We can help you out. He found that note, and he threatened to go to her house and kill her and her dogs. And so it was automatically my coworkers were like, we're not helping you. Figure it out. But we're not trying to get ourselves hurt. So, that's what he did, was alienate anybody who kind of pointed out to me that this behavior was not okay. one day he let me go to town to go check the mail. I stopped by my old boss's house. I had driven taxi for him for about 9 months, and he wasn't there. And I'm like, okay, but I noticed that the shop next to his was empty. His son had moved out. And I was driving back into town, and I had a cell phone back then. It was like a little smartphone where, again, it couldn't really do much, and he would like go through all my social media and make sure he knew everybody that was on there and check my messages and stuff like that. So when I did have a phone, it was like heavily monitored. So I'm sitting at the post office, and he calls me and he said, hey, the neighbor said you stopped by. And I said, yeah, I said, do you have a place like for rent, like for just me? And he's like, oh, you're ready. He says that to me. He goes, yeah, you can rent the place next to mine. I said, I've got 2 cats. Like, my cats need to go too. And he goes, yeah, that's fine. I said, and I also have like no money. So I really don't know what we're going to do. And he goes, well, once you leave, you'll have money. So you can just pay me like every 2 weeks. You can pay half the rent. He was charging me $300 every 2 weeks. That's what he told me he would do. And I said, okay. He's like, and I know that car is not up and running yet. So I started thinking about it. I went home that night, and I remember, luckily everything I owned was already in boxes. I was just sitting there, and I remember coming home and the engine was pulled out of my car. And I was like, okay, well, there goes that. So I was like, I don't know what to do. So I'm sitting there, I'm thinking about it, but I was like, I was getting nervous, probably more scared than I had been any of the last 5.5 years, because I knew like I was going to leave, and this time I'm serious. And he had been getting to the point where he was so heavy into drug use. He was extremely paranoid, and he wasn't really going out a lot anymore. So I was like thinking to myself, I really don't think he's going to show up at my parents at this point. I think that, all that talk a couple years back, I think it was just talk. You know what I mean? I started to realize that like, I don't think this is going to happen. And he also sold most of his guns because he had no money. So the next day I went to work, acted like everything was normal, and I used the work phone to call. And I said, okay, I really want to do this. How do I get my stuff there? And he goes, what time to get off? And I told him what time I got off. And he said, there's a little store by my house. And he goes, when you come into the neighborhood, there's going to be a red truck with a woman in it at the store. She's going to help you. And I was like, okay. So I get to the store. There's a woman in a red truck, and I had never met her before. She was like 5'2", like she was tiny. And she's like, are you ready? And I was like, yeah. And she followed me to the house. And I remember pulling up, opening the gate, and he comes out and he goes, who's that? What are you doing? I said, that's my friend. He goes, who the hell is this? And I was like, I'm moving out. That's what I said. I'm moving out. And he goes, no, you're not. And I was like, yeah, no, I'm moving out. And he started freaking out. He started telling my friend, don't block my driveway. And she's like, okay, that's fine. I'll park right out here on the fence line. And he started taking my stuff and throwing it in the front lawn. He goes, you better take your cats or they're going to get killed. I mean, the threat started coming, the name, you're useless anyway, you're an idiot, you're, just every name in the book that I've been called over the last 5 years. I remember his grandmother came over. She was freaking out too. She's like, I'm here as a witness in case anything happens. And I was like, okay, nothing's happening. Like, I'm leaving. I have the right to leave. They had spent 5 years complaining about what a horrible person I was and how lazy I was. So I was like, well, you should be happy that I'm leaving then, right? His mom was at the beach that day for her birthday. I was like, that's good that she's not there to add to this. But of course they called her, Megan's leaving. She's leaving. And she's like, what? It's just like, that should have been like the ultimate sign. Like, why is this family upset that you're leaving? It's like, because they're going to lose all their free shit, like all their free labor, everything that I was doing for them. Yeah, I just remember being screamed at, yelled at, things being thrown at me, being called names. It was scary. But I loaded up everything I had, which wasn't much. Took my cats, I put them in a carrier together. Oh, that was fun. They did not like it at all. But I did what I had to do. And I remember it was like, the more stuff I started loading in the car, the more empowered I felt. And I was like, this is actually happening. This is really, really happening. There's no going back from this. And I remember walking into the kitchen, in the fridge, and taking a soda. And I was like, I paid for this. And I left. And that was it, and we rode out of there. And like, it was, me and that woman are still friends to this day. But it didn't like necessarily stop there, because then of course he would call me. He started calling me, texting me, come back, you don't know what you're doing, this is stupid, you need me. And I was going to take you to the casino tonight. And I was like, oh, like that's so incentivizing, that you were going to take me to the casino and give me $20 and take whatever I want anyway. That's what he really thought my values were at that point, was, oh, I was going to get some drugs for us, or I was going to take you to the casino. And I think he really underestimated at that point that what my values were. It was pretty crazy. He started squatting in a house like at the end of the street, to try to catch me walking to work, because I had to walk to work. I didn't have a car. He would be up for 2-3 days at a time. Definitely was using meth at that point, like full blown, trying to text me anything to try to get my attention, like, I need your help, or I found this stray cat, I don't know what to do with it. It got to the point where the guy that was letting me stay next door, they would literally post up outside with a shotgun and just be like, if he shows up, they had my back. They really did. I remember started calling him my surrogate stepfather, because he was driving me to court to get a restraining order. He was helping me get to work. I got a car from a tow yard and he helped me get it up and running. Took me to the dentist to get my teeth fixed. My teeth had been damaged. And so I would say after about 3 or 4 months, he finally left me alone. That was probably the scariest time, was the day I left, and for the next 3 months. It was, scary in a different way, where I wasn't being physically harmed, but I was scared that he was just going to come and try to grab me back up and take me out there. And having to live in the same town, and of course his family is basically talking about me all over social media, just anything that they could do. They lost the person that was doing everything for their kid. They had to babysit him now. I wasn't the babysitter anymore. I had some health issues. I still have hearing problems from being, hit in the ear. Just doing an inventory, because of, yes, I used drugs, but it wasn't to the point where it had done any permanent damage. I was severely underweight, but that was just from not eating. I was allowed to eat once a day. So I was 110 pounds when I left, and I'm 5'6". So that's like pretty underweight. You could see my collarbone and my ribs, or my hips bones sticking out. I was back on track to start gaining weight. I remember like fast food. I was like, I could eat whatever I want, whenever I want. So I gained like a lot of weight at first, because it was just complete overcompensation. The very last month of 2016 is when I was able to get over the mountain and move. And I think that helped a lot in terms of, being away from them. And I remember when I was moving all my stuff into the new place, I had gotten a roommate. So I got a job too. I got a job as a security guard. I remember pulling in the driveway after work, and a truck pulls in behind me. And my first reaction is I grabbed a baseball bat that I kept in the back seat, and I'm like ready to go. And then he's like, whoa, Megan, it's me. It's your roommate. Like, that's just the fear that I had. Anytime I saw a car that I thought was his car, or anything, I would get just freaked out. So I was working security on a casino reservation, and so the security guards, it's very similar to law enforcement, because law enforcement can't go there. And because I had telephone operator experience, I was dispatching for them. So I was like way in the back in a room, and I remember hearing a guard say, hey, I need to run a name out real quick. And they spelled the last name and they spelled the first name, and I freaked out. So I had given a copy of the restraining order to my supervisors and said, hey, if he does find out I'm working here, he might come in, and just letting you know. So they had his picture in like their computer system saying, if this person comes in, immediately arrest for violation of restraining order. They knew that this guy shouldn't be in here, and that an employee had a restraining order, but they didn't know who, and they didn't know why. The security officer had seen a guy that looked just like him. So the first name was the same too. And so he runs the name out like that. And I started panicking, and my senior dispatcher was like, Megan, like, what's going on with you? Like, I was hyperventilating, and he's like, what, you're safe. Like, you're back here behind the glass. And I was like, it doesn't matter. It does not matter. It's something I can't explain. And he goes, well, here. And he pulls up the camera so I can see them going up to the guy. And I was like, that's not him. As soon as I saw it, I was like, that's not him. I was like, I'm good now, But it just, I think that even my coworkers were able to understand at that point this irrational fear that it causes, even though, I'm safe as safe can be. It's just, you can't explain it. It's PTSD. That's what it is. In 2019, I decided to report it to the sheriff's office of the county where it happened. They interviewed me, and that case is going to the DA's office this month. I don't know if they're going to bring on full human trafficking charges. Human trafficking is really hard to prove. And that's something that I teach law enforcement now when I teach these classes. It's very hard to actually get a conviction for 236 PC, which is human trafficking. The most we'll probably get is sexual assault, maybe false imprisonment, but there's statute of limitations on things like battery or the assault, like regular assault. We'll see what happens. I put myself through school, so I'm a certified EMT. I worked as an EMT for a while, and now I'm a bail enforcement agent, and I am a full-time private investigator. After the EMT, I started going through criminal justice classes at the junior college. I put this presentation together and started just going out and slinging it to law enforcement and trying to give them a different perspective. And so far, it's been well received. My long-term goal was to work in law enforcement because I felt like there would be no better job for me because I could actually be out there, recognize it when I see it, and then implement training and, the things I want. It's been hard. I've been disqualified a couple times because of the drug use, because of the crimes that I witnessed. So I have gone through the hiring process a couple times, but doing the work I'm doing, I could go to one department and I could change that department, maybe. Or I could keep teaching and give this presentation to all the departments. So I feel like by teaching and instructing that I am helping more than one community. I even had an officer from a department call me the other day and said, "Hey, I remember you talked about this and I just came across the situation. Is that what I'm thinking it is?" And I was like, "Yes, it is." And he's like, "Awesome. Okay, thanks." So they are retaining and they are learning and they're willing to remember. And so, I do the bail enforcement, I do the private investigation, I teach my class, and, I volunteer at the same nonprofit that's run by Elizabeth Quiroz. She is really the one that made me realize that what happened to me was human trafficking, because I knew that what was happening to me was messed up and it wasn't right. And nobody should do that to another person, but I didn't define it as human trafficking. And that's what I come across the most with victims, is they don't know that what's happening to them is human trafficking, so they can't report it as such. The hardest problem is the victims have to be able to identify themselves as victims first to be able to get help, if nobody else can identify them as a victim. And because there's so much sensationalism with sex trafficking and Save the Children, we're only looking at little kids getting kidnapped from box stores, and we need to think bigger than that. Because if this is your only idea of what sex trafficking is, then you're not going to recognize all these other forms to be able to tell a victim, "Hey, you're being trafficked." So if the public doesn't know what it is and the victim doesn't know what it is, they're stuck there. And so that's what my big goal is right now, is just education in the community. We are a very law enforcement based country. They're one of the only people that can do anything about this. It's what can you do without calling law enforcement? Not much. So we have put law enforcement in this bracket where they have so much control, then they need to get the right training. So that's what I do now, and I'm able to connect that way, and I still have that kind of street knowledge and street connection to where I am effective at doing that work. When I do my presentations, I talk about red flags, risk factors. Talk to your city council about a big brother, big sister program. Somebody needs to be a mentor to that kid before a trafficker becomes the mentor. To step in, and when you see that kid that's at risk, you need to get in there, before the trafficker does. Absolutely. My mom works with children in a pretty at-risk place, but she didn't recognize it like that. I think because of the fact that the kids that she works with are going through so much, she has kids who are homeless. I don't think that she really viewed me as at risk compared to the kids that she was working with. I do commend my parents, because my mom was 23 when she adopted me. I was 8 years old. I couldn't have raised an 8-year-old at 23 years old. No way. Their intentions were good. They did what they thought was right. Maybe there's a little bit of resentment sometimes. I think about the experiences I missed out on, not going to sports games, not really dating, but it is what it is, and it's over with, and they support me in everything that I do now. I was in a mindset back then that your family doesn't care about you. And I had said a couple times, I'm going to call the cops. He goes, you'll go to jail too because there's marijuana here and there's guns here. So I was in a mindset that cops were not going to help me. I would go to jail too, and my family didn't care about me. It's all about knowing what I know now. Police are getting better training, and I know there's a lot of distrust out there, so it's hard to say. It's hard because a lot of people are going to believe me when I say, call the cops. Knowing what I know now, I know if I had told the cops, like, hey, this is what's happening, they would have helped me. I know they would have helped me, but again, I didn't identify as a victim too. Or you reach out to your family, and it is hard too because we do get victims that they get help from their family and then they go back, and then they get help from their family and go back. So the family gets worn away too. There are resources out there and people are willing to help you. You have to trust. You really have to trust. It got to the point where if I don't do this, I'm going to die. So what if I go to jail? I'd rather be in jail at this point than dead. And especially where I was living, there was like one domestic violence shelter, and I was like, there's no way for me to get there. So that was a big hesitation for me too, is where am I going to go? That would have been me out there homeless in a tent if this guy had not taken me in. This is a community effort. Call, and there's somebody that's going to help you. If you're not hearing enough positive things, you're not going to think that you can get out of this, but you can. Whatever your trafficker has told you to make you think that you don't deserve better, you deserve better.